Welcome to Slashback Cinema, the podcast where we rewind to the glory days of 70s and 80s horror movies. I'm Shawnee Luft.
And I'm Ryan Dreimler.
We miss those iconic and classic and cheesy horror films from our childhood, from slashers to the supernatural. So we're here to rewatch the classics that made us scream and maybe cringe a little, while we still find out if they pack a punch or just make us laugh. Ryan, what is our nightmare fuel for today?
Today we're going to watch and review Creepshow from 1982. This is a classic horror anthology with the two masters, George Romero and Stephen King, spearheading this one.
Even back then, they were huge names. Even in 82, Stephen King, he would get bigger, but I think he had already released 3 or 4 of his big novels like Carrie and Salem's Lot.
Yeah.
And Romero had already released Night of the Living. He'd released, I think, 2 of the zombie movies, right? Night of the Living Dead, and then I think Dawn of the Dead.
They were well established as leaders in horror, one with film and the other through novels. But Stephen King definitely started hitting the screen with a bunch of his movies around this time. I think it was like we had Carrie and Christine and Maximum Overdrive and Cujo. And
I was about to ask you if you saw Maximum Overdrive.
I saw pieces of it as a kid, and I think that was his directorial debut. So I don't remember if it's good or bad. He admits to being completely coked out of his mind when he directed that movie. So
yeah,
could be interesting.
Yeah, it's not a good movie. The short story he based that on is actually really good, but it's pretty different. So it's funny, I still remember the short story. And it's kind of like this, like Stephen King wrote a lot of short stories. Back when we were kids, there was like a market for those kinds of stories, like magazines and horror anthologies would come out, like you could pretty regularly pick up that stuff. Ray Bradbury wrote a lot of great short stories. You get a lot of these really good horror stories or sci-fi stories without reading a whole novel. Nowadays, I guess people, I don't know, put their stories on the internet. I'm not sure what you do if you want to publish a short story these days or where you'd go.
You don't need to write it anymore. The AI bots are doing it for you. So that's all been taken care of.
Yeah, if the AI bots are writing them, maybe the AI bots can read them. And then the AI bots can watch the movies that the AI bots make. And then what the hell are we for?
Excellent question.
We'll answer that on the next episode of Slashback Cinema.
I mean, he was a machine, Stephen King. He just wrote so much, and perhaps cocaine was a piece of it, but he just cranked out so much. I honestly was never as big of a fan of his as short stories, but that's just kind of my personal preference. Yeah. I loved the way he developed characters and his world building and his stories. Like, I didn't want them to only be a short story. I wanted to spend more time in that world. So,
do you have a favorite Stephen King novel?
In high school, I was just obsessed with him, and I think one summer I might have read like 8 or 10 of his books. I mean, The Shining obviously is a true classic. The Stand, the Dark Tower series. And actually, I kind of stopped reading his stuff. I would read him every once in a while here and there in more recent times. But I did pick up Fairy Tale. He wrote that during COVID, which I absolutely loved. Like, it's a different kind of, I would say, genre for him in terms of it's a little bit more fantasy versus horror, but so good. Just love it. Yeah. What, do you have a favorite?
I probably The Stand. I didn't probably read as many Stephen King books as you did, but I thought The Stand was just fantastic. And I read the shorter version, which is like only 900 pages or whatever. Later he released an uncut version that had another 200 or 300 pages. But the scope of the story and it took place across the whole country. There were so many characters, and he, like you said, he's incredibly good at building characters. So you just get really attached to them. That seems to me like the secret to horror. I think this is true in books as well as movies. You have to really be invested in whether a character lives or dies. You have to like really be interested in their life. And lots of horror writers and lots of horror movies can gross you out or do something insane. A movie we're talking about later on Slashback is like that. I think they just figured out how to gross people out, but I'm not sure they make you care about the people on screen. But King was always great at that.
So obviously we love his novels, but this is a very different format. It's more akin to the short story you were talking about. This movie was inspired by their love of comic books, and in particular EC Comics, which was Entertaining Comics. I know you're aware of them, but for folks that are listening that aren't tuned into EC Comics, they were in the 50s. They ranged from horror to science fiction. They had some true war stories, but they were pulpy, usually kind of short story for you'd get 2 to 3 per issue, these different stories, and they were incredibly well drawn, written. They were funny. They were often violent and graphic, and they would have these like grim fairy tale type of stories where it was usually somebody who did something bad got theirs. There was lots of stories of revenge, and usually there's like a bit of like gross out factor and shock to their stuff. So this whole movie comes out of that world and is definitely an homage to EC Comics and all the great stuff that was done during that time frame.
Yeah, Tales from the Crypt and The Vault of Horror. Oh, very nice.
Yes.
You've got, is that, hold it sideways so I can see, is that like a thick volume of...
Oh, yeah. So
collected...
this is the collected series of the box set, Tales from the Crypt.
Wow.
Like, it's got everything in it. I haven't cracked these open in a long time. Although I did crack it open for this podcast. I've got something to read from one of them.
Oh, good. I'm looking forward to that. I don't have that huge collection that you have. But I have read Tales from the Crypt stories before in the collections. And generally, my recollection of those stories is it's about people that get what they deserve, right? Kind of Twilight Zone-y, where like bad people get punished and good people get rewarded for the most part. So Creepshow consists of 5 short stories, and they all have a name. Father's Day, The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill, Something to Tide You Over, then one called The Crate, and then the last one is They're Creeping Up on You, which I had a really hard time with for reasons we'll explain. Do you have a short summary for each of them?
Father's Day, it's basically this older guy who was the patriarch of the family. He seemed to not be the most pleasant person. His family gather each year, and then one by one, they start to get picked off. You find he's come back from the grave because he was murdered, and he's exacting his revenge.
It's funny. I read multiple reviews of this that say George Romero, but there's no zombies. But the very first story is kind of a zombie story.
Totally.
The father bursts out of the ground, and then he has that super scary line. I believe it's, where's my cake?
Where's my cake?
You don't want to hear a zombie say that to you.
You know it's not going to end well.
And then the second one is The Lonesome Death of Jordy Verrill,
which actually starred Stephen King, who
played like a Southern hick. Character.
People definitely seem to be annoyed by his acting, but I actually enjoyed it. The plot on that one is this meteorite crashes to Earth, and Jordy wanders out and finds it and thinks about how he's going to become rich if he can sell it to the university. Well, it cracks open because he pours water on it. And perhaps there's something in that meteor that he shouldn't have touched, and he proceeds to be consumed by this growing fungus or moss thing that's come from the meteor.
Yeah, he touches the meteor, and then everything he touches starts to like grow weeds. And that's basically the whole story. And then the third one is Something to Tide You Over. This one is sort of complicated to explain, but it's a story about a guy. He finds out his wife is cheating on him. And so the way that Leslie Nielsen gets revenge on the guy and the woman, I found the meteor growing weeds easier to swallow than this plot. The way he gets revenge on them is he tricks them into burying themselves in sand up to their necks, and then the tide comes in and drowns them. That's kind of the story. But there's a twist at the end because the couple comes back from the dead. Again, it's like a kind of another zombie story because they're kind of like skeletons, and I like the makeup on this one. They had like seaweed on them.
Yeah.
And then they come back and exact revenge on Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah.
And then which one was next? I lost track.
The Crate.
Oh, yeah, it's the second.
Yeah.
That's the fourth one. The Crate's a long one. It's like 40 minutes.
That one was very long. It did feel like it could maybe be a little bit shorter, but that one is set in a school, and a bunch of academics, I'm assuming they were professors, are involved with the school research. They later discover in the basement of this school, there's this crate from the 1800s, and they proceed to open it up, and it reveals this creature who he appears to be some sort of monkey, orangutan, gorilla who's been living in this crate for 100 years, but apparently it was very hungry, and he starts taking everybody out.
And then Creeping Up on You, this is the one that I couldn't with this. And it's basically the story about a guy who is obsessed with this hyper clean space.
He seems like he's like one of these billionaire oligarch. You know, he's making a lot of money and telling a lot of people what to do.
And he's obsessed with this like clean space, but he's also a jerk. And then the whole story is he starts to like see roaches infest his space. And then I got to give it up for this movie. There's probably never been a movie that had this many bugs in it. Did you read about this? They had to buy each roach. And George Romero said the roaches were the biggest expense in the entire film. They bought 250,000 roaches.
Wow.
And they just start to appear a little at a time, and then more, and then more. And then it is like tidal waves of roaches. It's like insane.
That seemed delivered.
That was definitely the grossest one. You could just show all those roaches crawling over people. And by the way, credit to that actor, because they just like kept throwing roaches at him. Like the lights would go out, and then they'd come back on, and then he'd be just completely covered. It was pretty horrifying. And then they just kept upping it and upping it. And I said this in a previous episode, that horror and comedy both have to do this. You have to keep ramping up in order to have the joke keep working or have the horror keep working. And then they're creeping up on you just really lays into the roaches until finally it's like entire rooms full, not just the floor, but absolutely every single surface is covered. I read that the production studio that was filmed in had a roach problem for years afterward because of that. They were unable to collect up all these roaches
Oh my God.
that they had unleashed onto the set.
So I was thinking of you and that comment that you made. We watched The Substance this past weekend. This is a little bit off the pocket, but related in terms of this one. They're creeping up on you, kept turning up the dial.
That's the new Demi Moore movie.
Yes, right? Substance does exactly what you're saying, to the point of I don't know that I've ever seen, like they fucking broke the dial off of the thing as you get to the last 3/4 of that movie where oh my God. Like, yeah.
I haven't seen it yet, but I'm really looking forward to it.
I had no idea that movie was going to do that. I thought it would be this kind of body horror thriller thing, but yeah. boy, the director really, she was all in.
Excellent. I can't wait to see The Substance. All right, we got a recommendation. I'd love for people to hop on our socials and tell us if they saw The Substance, what they think of it.
Yeah, or should we talk about it? We've been talking about that too. Like, should we dabble in more contemporary film?
Absolutely. So of these 5, was one of them your favorite? Did you have a preference?
I really liked Father's Day, Something That Tied You Over. I thought was great also. Those are probably my 2 favorites. The Crate was a little bit long, and They're Creeping Up on You almost felt a little bit different. Like a lot of times with these anthologies, there'll be one that almost feels like a bit of an odd man out. How about you?
I really like the Jordy Verrill one. I'm not even sure I can explain why. Just that idea of you touch something. In fact, I was so creeped out by, they cut to his fingers and almost right away, he's got these little kind of like wart things on his fingers.
Yeah. And
he keeps putting his hand in his mouth, and that grossed me out. And then you start to like slowly notice everything he's touching has like buds sprouted. And I got a kick out of Stephen King's doofus character.
Oh, you done it now, Jordy Verrill. You monkhead.
I just got such a kick out of that.
I really like that one too. I didn't love the ending as much. Like I just wanted it to be more of a twist or something weird. Right. Like, spoiler alert, he takes himself out, which it had been so kind of creative and fun and campy, and I just felt like that was kind of like well.
Yeah, that's how I felt actually about a lot of these. As I didn't feel like they all ended with the biggest punch or biggest twist like they could have, or they didn't take the story as far. I kept thinking back to our conversation about Basket Case, and I just thought Basket Case, what I loved about it was just how far the director was willing to go with this crazy conceit. And I thought none of the 5 stories were as just unusual or weird as I thought Basket Case was. And then they all had, I thought, like kind of fairly traditional endings where what happened is exactly what you expect to happen. Were any of them really scary to you? I found them kind of funny or kind of gross.
It's like that campy horror in terms of them not being that unexpected, or maybe it was a little predictable. I felt like Father's Day and Something That Tied You Over were the closest in some ways to an EC comic come to life.
Yeah.
Like those are exactly how the stories played out. It was, somebody gets murdered or killed. He comes back from the grave and he takes them out. And that was played out to a T in Father's Day and Something That Tied You Over. So to me, those endings fit right in the space. And clearly George Romero and Stephen King loved EC comics. Those felt like they came onto the screen in very true to the comic. But they're adapting material from the 1950s into the 1980s. And we're also now currently reviewing a storytelling form that dates back to the 50s. So there's something definitely older.
They don't translate quite as well.
If you love that type of format and the storytelling is like short and punchy and like kind of like, oh, surprise ending, and then you're off to the next story.
That's something I like about it, that if you don't like a story, just wait 15 minutes. Another one will come around. So Something That Tied You Over does seem to be a fan favorite. There were 2 things about it that took me out of it. One is I can't watch Leslie Nielsen in anything as a serious person. Leslie Nielsen is so good at comedy, from Airplane and Police Academy. Like
Naked Gun, yeah.
Naked Gun. Yeah, he has such a remarkable talent for delivering a straight line that is hilarious that I can't see him as anything other than that. So when he tries to play this kind of like brooding, angry, vengeful husband, it didn't work for me. The lines that he was really attempting to say straight just seemed kind of funny to me when he definitely didn't intend it.
You listen to me, Harry, and listen carefully, unless you let me in and talk to me. Something very nasty is going to happen to Rebecca.
And the other problem I had with Something to Tide You Over is basically the plot. The machinations of what had to happen for this plot to work just require people to do things that make no sense, and for technology to work in ways that I don't know how they would have worked in the 80s. Because
really long extension cords. That's all you need to know.
Not only is he bearing them up to their heads and then waiting for the tide to come in, there were easier ways. He rigs it up so that there are closed circuit TVs so that the two of them can watch the other one slowly drowning. These are TVs on the beach. So, and I was thinking, is there like a generator? Do you see have two generators hooked up to these things?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. You just can't think about kind of how it actually all worked too closely other than they had TVs that could see each other and he was watching them. But yeah, when you see the Zenith TV sitting in the in the sand.
And the cameras with the tripods. But I kept thinking this story would make much more sense today because with our cell phones, you could do this.
Drop it on the beach there.
Yeah. The amount of like just technological know-how and the skill set. I can't believe no one got electrocuted with all these electronics and cords around the high tide. It just seemed like there were other ways to go. Father's Day, that one really did remind me of an EC comic. There's this kind of long setup explanation of how the patriarch of the family was a complete whack job. He was eventually killed, I guess, for his money, but also because he was super obnoxious.
Terrible person, right.
Yelling, "Where's my cake?" Which, by the way, do people get cake on Father's Day? Because I need to talk to my family about this. If that's a regular, if I'm missing out.
That is an excellent point. Yeah, we should bring that tradition back.
I don't think I've ever gotten cake.
We need to be recognized more for our efforts. This might be an unpopular statement, but where's our cake? Where's my cake?
That's were there favorite scenes you can think of?
I really enjoyed, and it's less of a scene than just kind of like an overall vibe that showed up throughout the movie is they really brought a whole look and aesthetic to this film.
That's what I was going to say.
That brought the comic book feel to life. But the lighting was fantastic, and they had different kind of like the blue and the red lighting for Father's Day, and then they had more of like a green blue for Something That Tied You Over, and then the Creeping Up on You was very white in appearance. And then they laid it in all these really cool graphic backgrounds. So they cut to a scene of like Leslie Nielsen, like, oh, and it'd be like this like crazy like swirly pattern, or the shock radiating circles and lines coming behind somebody when there was a high drama or reveal scene. And then obviously the creature effects and all that. Just it had a great look to the whole film, which made it really fun.
That was exactly what I was going to say, is if you are familiar with those EC comics, the movie knows that language, and they like reproduce some of those panels in the medium of film, and that was really entertaining. I also liked in between some of the stories, they would cut to the comic. So it would be introduced as a drawing and then sometimes fade back into a drawing. On the screen, sometimes there would be ads for products that we used to see in the 70s, 80s. And I was pausing at each one of those and reading all those little ads for X-ray specs.
Charles Atlas, bodybuilding.
I found all that stuff really entertaining. Somebody took the time to recreate all of those fake ads and fake products. And man, when I was a kid, I dreamed about X-ray specs and all of those. I never sent away for any of that.
I think I did, and everything you got was extremely disappointing. I think at one point I had sent away, it was probably less well-known or not as recognizable, but in one of the comic books, it was build your own hovercraft. And I was like, this is incredible! So I sent away for the plans, which they weren't that cheap. I feel like I paid like $9 or something for these plans, which was, that was some serious money back then. And it involved a vacuum cleaner engine, and actually I did build it, but it just like came off the ground about half of an inch, and if you put any weight on it, it just
it came off the ground.
All of them extremely disappointing. You could not see through a wall. You could not turn it visible. You would not get the girls or the buff body. It was all.
I thought you were going to say you bought those little space monkeys. Those little creatures.
Oh yeah. No, those sea monkeys.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely ordered some sea monkeys.
Did they come to life? Did they look just like the drawings?
They did not look like the drawings. I know you're shocked to hear that. I believe they were brine shrimp that had a little container and you could like look at them, but they were not playing or smiling or hanging out with their sea monkey brethren.
Yeah, the drawing, it was like a dad and a mom and a baby, little sea monkey. Yeah, and so I think it's useful for kids to learn that life is disappointing. I feel like those ads were how you learned what the world was really like. You're going to get ripped off.
Well, comic books taught you everything. If you did something bad, you were going to get killed or come back as a zombie, or you're going to meet some horrible fate. And then, you would get ripped off if you thought you were going to be able to buy your X-ray specs and see through the walls. That was not the case. Good
about lesson. The best thing that you could hope for in a comic book is that you get bit by a radioactive spider. On a good day.
Yeah.
You could get powers. Did you ever think, like in the Grimm's fairy tales, like, oh, if I'm not a good boy, I'm going to get it?
Yeah, I probably got enough of that from the church that EC Comics was just a reinforcing factor in my life. But
the church is the original EC comic.
Yeah, totally. Well, for those that don't know,
it's the JC comic.
Yeah, Jesus, measuring out punishment for the non-believers. Well, so EC Comics, basically, they came up, they were huge and had big cultural influence, but then there came all that fear that they were corrupting the youth of America. And this might have been during McCarthyism and all that, where there was like press restrictions. They started clamping down on what was okay and what wasn't. And lots of, I think, court action. And eventually there was a comics code authority that came to life that had to review every single episode comic before it could be released.
Yeah.
And it essentially forced them out of business because they wouldn't comply with the restrictions. I thought this was really interesting because it kind of ties into some fears that people have of where we might be going as a country currently too.
Okay.
So this was published in March of 1955, and it starts with in memorandum, and it reads out, "You may never read this magazine. For that matter, this magazine may never be printed. If it is printed, it may never be distributed. If it is distributed, it may be kept in a bundle behind the counter and never see the light of day. But if through some miracle it does reach the newsstand, this will probably be the last issue of this magazine you will ever read. As the result of hysterical, injudicious, and unfounded charges leveled at crime and horror comics, many retailers and wholesalers throughout the country have been intimidated into refusing to handle this type of magazine. Although we at EC still believe, as we have in the past, that the charges against horror and crime comics are utter nonsense, there's no point in going into a defense of this kind of literature at the present time. Economically, our situation is acute. Magazines that do not get into the newsstands do not sell well. We are forced to capitulate. We give up. We've had it. Naturally, with comic magazine censorship, in fact, we at EC look forward to an immediate drop in the crime and juvenile delinquency rates of the United States. We trust there will be fewer robberies, fewer murders, and fewer rapes. We would like to say in passing away that is, that if you've enjoyed reading EC Comics' horror and crime efforts over the past 5 years, as much as we truly enjoyed creating them for you, then our labors of love have not been in vain." It goes on, but
that's great.
Yeah, damn. So essentially, they were running out of business, but they had a huge cultural impact that Creepshow obviously heavily influenced. And here we are, all these years later, talking about it.
Yeah, they went out with some integrity. I love that part where he says, "We look forward to the massive drop in crime and teenage delinquency as soon as our comic gets off the shelves." Right. So I guess we should get to Stabby ratings.
Let's do it. What do you got?
I was very milquetoast on this. Some of them I thought were okay. Some of them I thought were not that great. The roach one was just too disgusting to contemplate, but good for them for leaning in and getting all the roaches in North America onto screen at one time. But Stabby rating wise, I was like 2.5, 2 stabs in like a paper cut. I feel like I've said this about some of the other movies. It seems like a good horror movie for young people, right?
Compared to what shows up in some of the horror movies today, it's horror light in some ways, although some of the scenes are gross, but
it's horror with training wheels. Because they're all short stories, there's not a lot of character development. I didn't find all the stories really satisfying. They weren't quite as weird as I wanted them to be, even though I think they did fit into the kinds of stories I remember from those 50s comic books. So how about you? What did you think?
There was a lot I liked about this. We talked about some of the stylistic look. Tom Savini did the special effects for this one. Great work on this. Really well done. And all the limitations of the 80s in terms of, there's a certain look that comes to life. I think it works with this movie. Visually, I really appreciated what they put into bringing the comics to life. Love some of the stories, but like you're saying, there's always a little bit of an unevenness to these short story and that kind of influences the overall takeaway from the film. I'm gonna give this one 3.5 stabs. I wanted to give it 4, but I don't know that it merits 4, especially comparing it to some of the other stuff that we've watched as we've been going through this podcast. So campy, fun, got some great style and look, and I'm a huge fan of EC Comics and Romero and King. Is it the cream of the crop? No, but is it good kind of fun from the 80s? Absolutely.
It seems worth sharing with people that if they're interested, we've got Slashback Cinema merch. You can go to slashbackcinema.com, check it out. You could toss the podcast a couple of bucks with a donation. Or you could just come say hi on our socials. What are our socials, Ryan?
You'll find us on TikTok and Instagram, /backcinema.
Let us know what you think of the podcast. Suggest a movie that we should talk about next.